The last thing anyone saw was 7-year-old Lily Parker sitting on a metal bench at Greenville Elementary's football field, legs swinging, a cup of orange Gatorade in her hands as she cheered for her brother's team. Minutes later, her seat was empty. Left behind, the pink headband she wore every day, folded neatly on the bleacher, streaked with a single smudge of mud. 25 minutes after she vanished, a scream echoed from the woods behind the field. The game stopped. The town's laughter turned to terror. And Greenville, Kentucky, once a place where everyone felt safe, would never be the same again. For 5 long years, there were no answers, no arrests, just silence, and a mother who refused to stop searching. Until one strand of DNA, barely visible on the sweater of a 7-year-old girl, broke the case wide open. What really happened to Lily Parker that night? And how did a single mistake expose the monster who had been hiding in plain sight? Tell me, where are you watching from tonight? Leave your location in the comments below so we can connect. I spent hours putting this story together for people like you, those who care about justice and the forgotten. They say no one will subscribe to a small true crime channel like mine, but I still believe good people will prove them wrong. So please, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell icon. And may God bless every person who still believes the truth deserves to be told. It was a Saturday evening that felt like any other in Greenville, Kentucky, a town where the days blended together and the biggest events were the school football games. November 15th, 2014 brought a chill in the air, the kind that made you tug your jacket tighter and breathe in a little sharper. Floodlights cast long, trembling shadows across the Greenville Elementary football field, illuminating a scene of laughter and ordinary joy. Children darted up and down the sidelines, faces sticky with remnants of cotton candy, chasing after each other with the kind of carefree energy adults always envied. Parents gathered in the bleachers, talking about work, about life, never expecting the evening to bring anything but routine comfort. In the midst of it all, 7-year-old Lily Parker sat on the edge of a metal bench, her legs swinging restlessly, a cup of orange Gatorade cradled between her hands. Her eyes sparkled with anticipation as she cheered for her big brother's team, every touchdown igniting a squeal of excitement. She wore her favorite pink headband, a gift from her grandmother, and a sweater just a little too big for her, sleeves pulled down over tiny fists. To anyone watching, Lily was just another happy kid, lost in the simple thrill of the game. Her mother, Laura, kept an eye on both the field and her daughter, exchanging smiles with other parents and offering quiet encouragement to her son whenever he glanced her way. The scene was so ordinary, so perfectly safe, that it almost felt untouchable by anything dark. For a brief moment, Greenville felt untouched by tragedy. But as the sun dipped lower and the sky turned a bruised shade of purple, a subtle sense of unease crept in at the edges. Some parents glanced at their watches, gathering up jackets and backpacks. A soft wind tugged at Lily's hair, and she brushed it away, giggling at something her friend whispered. The game continued, whistles blowing, the crowd erupting in applause. Then, in the blink of an eye, the ordinary fractured. Laura turned around, expecting to see her daughter right where she'd left her, but the seat was empty. Lily's cup sat abandoned, a ring of condensation left on the bench. A pink headband lay folded beside it, its ends streaked with a smudge of mud. Laura's heart skipped a beat, confusion twisting into worry as she scanned the crowd for the familiar bounce of her daughter's blonde ponytail. At first, no one panicked. Someone nearby remembered seeing Lily walking toward the concession stand, maybe to grab a last-minute treat. A few minutes passed, then 10, then 15. The buzz of conversation grew quieter, heads turning. Parents calling out for their children just to be sure. Then, the first rumor floated through the air. A neighbor's child had seen Lily near the edge of the trees that bordered the field, a shadow slipping away from the safety of the lights. Laura's voice rose, calling her daughter's name, the edge of fear sharp in her tone now. And then, just 25 minutes after Lily had disappeared from the bleachers, a scream shattered the evening calm. It echoed from the woods behind the field, piercing through the crowd and freezing every heart in its tracks. The football game stopped. People rushed toward the source of the cry, stumbling over benches and leaping fences. The quiet town of Greenville suddenly thrust into chaos. In the cold air, under the harsh glare of the stadium lights, the nightmare began. What really happened to Lily Parker that night would haunt Greenville for years to come. An ordinary evening, twisted forever by a moment no one could have predicted. Greenville, Kentucky was the kind of town where nothing much happened, and everybody seemed to know everyone else. Rows of small houses lined quiet streets, most with carefully trimmed lawns and faded American flags, waving lazily in the breeze. People waved at each other from porch swings, and the grocery store clerk knew not just your name, but your kids' names too. Life was simple, predictable, and felt as safe as the white picket fences that framed many front yards. On the far edge of town, the Parker family lived in a modest, cozy home. Their house stood just beyond the last row of mailboxes, a short walk from the elementary school. The paint on the wooden fence was chipped in places, but the swing on the front porch creaked cheerfully whenever a breeze passed by or when Lily pumped her small legs to see how high she could go. The family's cat, Pepper, lounged lazily under the porch most afternoons, always ready for Lily's gentle hands or her brother's rougher play. Inside, the Parkers lived an ordinary life. Ethan Parker worked long hours at the local hardware store, his hands rough and calloused, always smelling faintly of sawdust. Laura, his wife, spent her days keeping the household running smoothly, always making time to bake Lily's favorite cookies or help with homework at the kitchen table. There was nothing unusual about them, nothing to hint at the storm that would upend their world. Lily, just 7 years old, was the heart of their home. She filled every room with laughter, her imagination running wild from morning until bedtime. She was bright and curious, always offering to help with chores or cheerfully waving at neighbors as they walked past. Most days, she could be seen in her signature pink headband, the one her grandmother had given her, and mismatched socks that she insisted were lucky. She loved stories about animals and dreamed of having her own puppy someday, though for now, Pepper was her constant companion. For Ethan and Laura, their greatest wish was that their children would grow up safe and happy in Greenville. Like so many parents in the town, they trusted their neighbors, never locking the doors until late at night, never worrying when Lily played outside as long as she stayed within sight of the house. That evening at the football field, the whole family gathered together, wanting to support their son as he played in one of the last games before winter. They blended seamlessly into the crowd, just another family cheering on the home team. Among the spectators that night stood Timothy Harlan. He was a familiar face to many in Greenville, a man who once volunteered as a coach at the elementary school, who always had a polite word or a quiet smile. Harlan was 38, lived alone in a rented house not far from the Parkers, and drove an old brown pickup with peeling paint. People described him as friendly. maybe a little reserved, but nobody seemed to know much about his life beyond surface details. He didn't join in the lively conversations in the bleachers or linger after games, slipping away before most people even noticed. Yet in small towns, secrets had a way of hiding in plain sight. On that Saturday night, as laughter drifted across the football field and Lily cheered for her brother, nobody gave a second thought to Harlan standing quietly near the edge of the crowd. The game was all that mattered. The town was wrapped in a sense of community, of security. Greenville was a place where children rode their bikes until dusk and everyone felt like family. That sense of safety, the quiet rhythm of everyday life, would soon be broken in the most unimaginable way. The people of Greenville, and the Parkers most of all, would soon learn that even in the safest places, darkness could sometimes find a way in. At 7:35 that night, just as the football game was rolling into its most exciting quarter, Lily tugged at her mom's sleeve and asked if she could get some cotton candy from the concession stand. Laura nodded, distracted for a moment by the action on the field, her attention divided between her daughter and her son's team chasing a crucial touchdown. Lily slipped down from the bleachers, her pink headband still perched neatly on her head, sweater sleeves flapping as she hurried away through the crowd. The minutes passed slowly at first. 5, then 10, then 15. Parents continued cheering, their voices echoing across the grass. But Laura's unease began to grow as she noticed Lily hadn't come back. She scanned the crowd, expecting to catch a glimpse of her daughter's familiar bounce, but Lily's seat remained empty. The cup of Gatorade was still sitting where she'd left it, now gathering dew in the cool air. Laura called out for Lily, first softly, then louder, hoping to hear a cheerful reply. There was nothing. She stood up, heart pounding, weaving through the bleachers, her eyes sweeping over the concession stand, the clusters of children near the fence, and the shadows stretching toward the tree line. A knot of dread settled in her stomach. One of the other mothers, a woman Laura vaguely recognized from church, offered a shaky reassurance. She's probably just talking with friends by the snack stand. But the pit in Laura's stomach deepened when a volunteer working the concession table shook her head. She hadn't seen Lily. The minutes ticked by, each one stretching out, tightening the coil of fear inside Laura. A small group of parents began to help, moving through the crowd, calling Lily's name. Someone mentioned seeing a little blonde girl near the back of the field, close to where the woods met the edge of the property. Another parent remembered seeing a man carrying a child, blonde hair, pink headband, walking toward the tree line, but they hadn't thought anything of it in the flurry of the game. Panic spread quickly. The game ground to a halt as word rippled through the crowd. The search began in earnest. Flashlights bobbed through the shadows as volunteers and coaches combed the field, the concession area, and then the thin strip of woods behind the bleachers. The sharp, anxious voices of adults called out into the darkness, each echo amplifying the fear that was starting to overtake the entire town. 25 minutes after Lily was last seen, a shrill scream pierced the night from beyond the trees. People rushed toward the sound, stumbling over roots and branches, breath misting in the cold air. In a shallow creek behind the field, searchers found Lily's small body. Her sweater was pulled askew, tangled with leaves, and her tiny hand still clutched a piece of wild grass, as if she'd tried to hold on to something familiar in her final moments. There were no obvious signs of a struggle, no torn clothing, no bruises except for the angry marks around her neck. But the worst came with the realization that the water in her lungs meant Lily had still been alive when she was placed in the creek. In that instant, the truth cut through every heart like ice. This wasn't an accident. Someone had stolen her away and left the entire town shattered. The shock settled heavily over the field as police arrived, blue and red lights slicing through the darkness, casting long shadows over stunned parents and silent children. Laura, wild with grief, clung to Ethan as he tried to shield her from the sight, but nothing could protect them now from the nightmare that had entered their lives. Greenville, a town that prided itself on being safe and close-knit, was plunged into an agony that would never truly fade. The innocence of that Saturday night was gone, and nothing would ever be the same again. News spread through Greenville faster than a storm front rolling over the fields. In the hours after Lily's body was found, the once cheerful football field became the site of a tragedy that no one could have imagined. Emergency vehicles crowded the parking lot, their lights flickering against the old wooden bleachers. Police officers moved quietly among the families, asking questions, writing statements, searching for anything that could explain how this could have happened in their peaceful town. By midnight, the football field stood deserted, shadows swallowing up the laughter and warmth that had filled the air only hours earlier. But in every home the nightmare continued. Doors that were usually left unlocked were bolted shut. Curtains were drawn. Parents tucked their children into bed and double-checked windows, listening to the stillness of the night for any unfamiliar sound. The tragedy was no longer something that happened in far-off cities. It was right there, in their own backyard. For Laura, sleep became impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Lily's face, her smile, the way her small hand had clung to her favorite headband. Laura clung to Lily's sneakers, holding them close to her chest, as if doing so could somehow keep her daughter from slipping away completely. The house felt empty, silent except for the dull ticking of the hallway clock and the soft mews of Pepper the cat. Ethan tried to be strong, but night after night he found himself driving past the field, headlights sweeping over the empty bleachers, haunted by memories of that last normal evening. Greenville was a town in mourning. Neighbors gathered in hushed clusters, leaving pink balloons, candles, and faded flowers tied to the Parkers' fence. People brought casseroles and cookies, but no one knew what to say. The loss was too great, the wound too raw. Some families stopped letting their children play outside after sunset. Others watched from their porches, eyes scanning the street, searching for anything out of place. For the first time in years, fear walked the sidewalks of Greenville. But grief didn't stay silent for long. Whispers began to circulate, swelling in volume as shock turned to suspicion. "Someone among us did this," the voices murmured. Old secrets were dragged into the light. People remembered odd looks, strange habits, things they'd once shrugged off as harmless quirks in their neighbors. Some pointed fingers at outsiders, while others wondered if the person responsible had been right there on the field, blending in with the crowd. Rumors fueled anxiety. Children overheard fragments of conversations and clung tighter to their parents' hands. Teachers noticed empty seats in classrooms as families pulled their kids from school, unable to bear the thought of letting them out of sight. Local news trucks arrived, cameras capturing the candlelight vigils, the tear-streaked faces of classmates and friends. The Parkers, lost in their own heartbreak, barely registered the growing media storm. Laura wandered through the house in the evenings, pausing in the doorway of Lily's bedroom to smooth the covers, to tidy up the stuffed animals that would never be played with again. Ethan worked late, trying to outrun his memories, but nothing could keep the ache at bay. Days slipped by, and the town's sense of unity wavered. Where once there was trust, now suspicion grew like a weed. Still, the community clung together, gathering for vigils at the football field, lighting candles and tying ribbons to the old fence, hoping the light might somehow drive back the darkness. In Greenville, the air was thick with grief, fear, and an aching need for answers. The search for justice had only just begun. The investigation into Lily Parker's death consumed Greenville. Police descended on the town, not just from the local department, but from the Kentucky State Police as well. Crime scene tape still fluttered around the bleachers and the creek, marking a boundary no one wanted to cross. Officers went door to door, their notebooks filling with the statements of parents, volunteers, and football fans who'd been at the game that night. The faces of investigators grew grimmer with every question that seemed to lead to another dead end. No detail was too small. The muddy grass around the creek was combed for evidence, each footprint measured and photographed, each scrap of fabric collected and bagged. Officers worked late into the night, their flashlights flickering along the banks, boots sinking into cold mud. When they discovered a partial shoe print in the soft earth, a pattern that matched a common brand of work boot, they held onto it as a fragile thread of hope. Rumors churned through Greenville like a restless wind. Every parent wondered who could be responsible, and whether the killer was someone they knew. One name surfaced more often than the rest: Timothy Harlan. He had been there at the football game, standing near the edge of the crowd, eyes following the players and the children darting between the bleachers. Harlan's reputation had always been vague. People described him as polite but distant, helpful but never truly close to anyone. Some recalled that he'd once volunteered as a youth coach years before, but had left abruptly after complaints were made against him. Whispers of inappropriate conduct that never led to charges. Now, the old suspicions seemed newly sinister. Investigators took special note of Harlan's worn brown jacket, which was similar to the one a witness recalled seeing in the darkness behind the field. When the security footage from an aging camera near the parking lot was finally reviewed, it captured a blurred silhouette of a man walking toward the woods, something small cradled in his arms. The image was too indistinct to serve as evidence, but the timing matched when Lily disappeared. The work boot print by the creek became a focal point. Harlan, when questioned, admitted that he owned similar boots. He was cooperative, answering the officers' questions without hesitation, but his answers were all too neat. There were no witnesses who could place him with Lily at any point, and no physical evidence that directly tied him to the crime. His past record, though concerning, wasn't enough. The police pressed, combing through every hour of his day, searching his home for clues, digging into old files from the school. Yet, nothing concrete emerged. As days turned into weeks, the case began to cool. Hundreds of people had attended the football game, but no one had seen anything useful, and most leads turned out to be nothing more than the result of fear and rumor. Harlan remained under a quiet cloud of suspicion, but there was no arrest. He continued his routines, now watched closely by a town that eyed him with growing distrust. The Parkers, meanwhile, could do nothing but wait. Laura haunted the police station, desperate for answers, clutching a worn photograph of Lily. Ethan worked himself to exhaustion, unable to sleep, unable to escape the guilt of that night. Neighbors, once so friendly, now kept their distance from the Parkers and from each other, the tragedy cracking the foundation of their small community. As autumn faded and the first frost arrived, the trail grew colder. The case file grew thick with interviews and evidence logs, but nothing new came to light. Eventually, the police had no choice but to step back, their efforts exhausted. The file was boxed up, labeled, and sent to the Kentucky State Police Archives, joining a long row of unsolved tragedies. The sense of loss in Greenville was deepened by frustration and helplessness. The killer had slipped through their fingers, and the town was left to live with unanswered questions and a gnawing fear that justice would never come. Time began to move differently for the people of Greenville. As 2015 turned to 2016, and then to 2017, the tragedy of Lily Parker's disappearance and death became a heavy shadow cast across every season. The football field, once the center of autumn excitement, now sat under a cloud of memory and loss. Families passed it in silence, children stealing uneasy glances at the stretch of woods behind the bleachers, parents gripping their hands a little tighter. The Parkers' house changed, too. For months after the investigation stalled, pink ribbons still fluttered on the white picket fence and faded drawings of Lily taped to the front window blurred in the sun. Inside, Laura could barely move through the rooms without brushing against memories. Lily's favorite books lined up on the shelf, her pink headband resting on a nightstand, tiny sneakers by the door as if waiting for feet that would never return. Ethan kept busy with repairs and chores, anything to dull the ache. At night, the two of them sat close in the living room, the television flickering but neither really watching, both afraid to speak the words they couldn't avoid. Nothing would ever be the same. The silence between them grew as the town tried to heal. Greenville's rhythms continued, but with a quiet new caution. The school put up more lights near the playground. Parents arranged carpools and group walks, rarely letting their children go anywhere alone. People who had once shared recipes and stories over backyard fences now traded anxious looks and kept conversations brief. The grief was communal, and yet deeply isolating. Even after months passed, nobody really trusted each other the same way again. For the Parkers, November became a month of ritual and remembrance. Every year on the anniversary of Lily's death, Laura and Ethan drove back to Greenville, even after they'd packed up and moved to a new town, desperate for a fresh start that never truly materialized. They visited the football field, bringing pink flowers and small candles, leaving them at the edge of the woods. Some years, a handful of townspeople joined them, standing quietly with bowed heads. Other years, the field was empty, the Parkers left alone with their sorrow. Meanwhile, Chonta, the case file, labeled in bold letters as Lily Parker Homicide, sat undisturbed in a Kentucky State Police archive, dust collecting along the edges. New crimes came and went, detectives retired, and Greenville's pain faded from public attention, replaced by the endless news cycle of tragedies elsewhere. Only the Parkers and a handful of loyal officers clung to hope that something, someday, might break the silence. That hope flickered again in the fall of 2019, nearly 5 years after that awful night. A young technician, new to the force and eager to prove herself, came across the cold case while organizing evidence from unsolved files. Among the bagged belongings was Lily's sweater, sealed and preserved, and a tiny, nearly invisible trace of DNA lifted from the fabric. The technician, aware of recent advances in forensic technology, decided to submit the sample for another round of testing. Weeks passed with no word. Laura and Ethan had stopped expecting calls from the police long ago, their hope beaten down by disappointment. Then, One crisp October afternoon, the results arrived. The match was undeniable. The DNA belonged to Timothy Harlan, the man who had stood quietly at the edge of the crowd all those years ago. The news cracked open old wounds in Greenville, but this time there was something new, a spark of justice. The town braced itself for answers, ready, at last, to confront the darkness that had haunted them for so long. The news that Timothy Harlan's DNA matched the sample found on Lily's clothing swept through Greenville like wildfire. For years, suspicion had hovered, whispered, and half-formed. But now, after all the silence and uncertainty, there was something solid, unshakable and cold as stone. Police wasted no time. Within days, a team arrived at Harlan's home, a small, aging rental just a half-mile from where the Parker family had once lived. Harlan's house stood alone at the edge of a gravel road, its paint peeling, the yard overgrown with weeds. Neighbors watched from behind drawn curtains as officers surrounded the property. The search was methodical and thorough. Drawers were emptied, boxes upended, closets pulled apart as detectives moved through the rooms. What they found was chilling. A secret kept hidden in the shadows, finally brought into the light. In the back of a dusty closet, tucked behind winter coats and old newspaper stacks, the officers uncovered an old wooden chest. Inside, wrapped in a faded towel, was a tin box, its lid dented and scratched by time. When the detectives pried it open, they found a collection of small, haunting objects, strands of blonde hair, several colorful barrettes, and, most painfully, a torn pink headband. It was unmistakable, the same shade Lily always wore, the one she'd been wearing that night. It still bore the faintest trace of mud. The evidence was undeniable and overwhelming. Harlan, silent and composed as officers confronted him, simply stared at the box's contents as if seeing them for the first time. He didn't argue or run. When the handcuffs closed around his wrists, he offered only a single, cold remark. "I don't remember that night." The words, flat and emotionless, left officers chilled to the bone. But Greenville would remember forever. As the news broke, the town erupted with a complicated flood of emotion: relief, outrage, sorrow, and a strange sense of vindication. The sense of fear that had gripped every parent's heart twisted now into anger and a desperate need for justice. People gathered in small groups at the diner and the grocery store, voices lowered but urgent, discussing every detail of the arrest, replaying their memories of Harlan with a new, horrifying clarity. For the Parkers, the revelation brought no comfort, only the reopening of old wounds. Laura, who had spent years haunted by the memory of her daughter's last night, found herself staring for hours at the news reports, fingers trembling over the photo of Lily in her pink headband. Ethan, silent and exhausted, carried the news like a heavy stone. Yet, there was a sense, fragile, tentative, that the story which had defined and divided Greenville for so long might finally reach an ending. In the days that followed, police worked to build their case, tracing every thread of evidence back to Harlan. Old files were pulled, witness statements revisited. The town buzzed with rumors of what else the search had turned up: receipts, scraps of fabric, other small belongings that could connect him to crimes never solved or reported. But at the heart of it all was that small tin box, a collection of trophies kept as dark reminders of a secret only Harlan had known. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community, exposing the truth that sometimes evil hides in plain sight, disguised by ordinary faces and forgotten by time. As Greenville braced itself for the trial, the sense of closure mingled with new anxieties. The town had its answer, but the cost was almost too much to bear. The memory of Lily and the innocence the town had lost lingered in every shadow. And as the first leaves began to fall that October, Greenville waited, restless, hearts raw, for justice to finally be done. October 2019 arrived with a biting chill in the air, and a tension so thick it seemed to settle over every inch of Greenville. The trial of Timothy Harlan became the center of life in the small town, a magnet that drew together neighbors, old classmates, and strangers who had never really known the Parkers, but now felt bound to their tragedy. Each morning, people gathered outside the courthouse, bracing against the wind, clutching cups of coffee and the hope that justice would finally be done. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was heavy, solemn. Reporters filled the back rows, their pens scratching at notepads, cameras clicking quietly as the judge entered and the trial began. The Parkers sat at the front, Laura and Ethan side by side, both gaunt from years of grief, their eyes fixed on the man accused of destroying their family. The walls seemed to close in around them as the lawyers spoke, as the evidence was read aloud, every detail another slice through their already battered hearts. The prosecution laid out its case with methodical precision. The DNA found on Lily's clothes was presented as the key, irrefutable and final. Then came the tin box from Harlan's closet, each item inside treated with reverence and horror. The pink headband, still faintly stained, was held up for the jury, drawing a collective breath from everyone present. The testimony of officers, forensic experts, and townspeople formed a lattice of proof that tightened steadily around Harlan. Throughout the proceedings, Harlan sat at the defense table, shoulders slumped, eyes downcast. He spoke only when required, his answers short and empty. He offered no explanations, no apology, no plea for mercy. His silence was louder than any protest, and the absence of remorse chilled the courtroom. To the people of Greenville, he had become more than a man. He was the darkness they'd feared for years, made flesh. Laura took the stand on a gray morning, hands shaking as she faced the man accused of killing her child. Her voice trembled as she described Lily's laughter, the way she'd loved stories and animals, how she had begged for extra time at the football game that night. She spoke of the pain that never left her, the hole in her life that could never be filled. Her question, simple and raw, hung in the air. Why her? Why my little girl? Harlan did not answer, and the silence that followed felt like the whole town holding its breath. After days of testimony and hours of deliberation, the verdict was delivered. The judge's voice rang out across the silent room, guilty on all counts. The sentence was swift and final, life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom remained still as Harlan was led away, his head bowed, the sound of footsteps echoing on the tile. Ethan, who had barely spoken during the trial, wept quietly in the back row, clutching a photograph of Lily that had faded from years of being held and carried everywhere. The Parkers did not rejoice. There was no sense of victory, only relief, tinged with the exhaustion of a fight that had lasted far too long. For Greenville, the conclusion of the trial brought a kind of closure, but not peace. The wound left by Lily's loss would always ache, a scar across the town's heart. When the courtroom doors finally closed behind them, the Parkers stepped outside into the cool autumn sunlight, surrounded by friends and strangers who reached out with quiet gestures, hands on shoulders, soft words, silent tears. Justice had come, but the cost was everything they held dear. Still, in that moment, the truth was finally spoken aloud, and Greenville, wounded, wary, but no longer silent, could begin to heal. Though the story of Lily Parker haunted Greenville, it was not only the pain of one family or the darkness of one town. Beneath the fictional names and shaded details, there was a real tragedy, one that unfolded almost unbearably similar, just an hour's drive from Greenville, in the quiet heartland of Kentucky. In November 2015, the town of Scottsville faced a loss that would shock not just their own streets, but an entire state. 7-year-old Gabriella "Gabby" Doolin was much like Lily. Vivid, loving, her smile the sun around which her family's life revolved. On a brisk fall evening, she had gone with her parents to her brother's football game, the stadium lights flickering against a darkening sky, laughter and cheers filling the air. Gabby, excited and carefree, asked her mother if she could get a snack. She never returned. For 25 agonizing minutes, her family and neighbors called her name, hope rising and breaking with every unanswered shout. The search was frantic, hearts pounding, adults and children flooding the field and the nearby woods. When Gabby's body was found in a shallow creek behind the bleachers, the moment marked the end of innocence for her family and for everyone in Scottsville. The town, just like Greenville, closed its doors, whispered in anxious tones, and learned to look at familiar faces with new, uneasy suspicion. The horror of Gabby's loss shook the nation. What followed was a relentless pursuit of justice, led by parents who refused to let their daughter's memory be swallowed by grief. The investigation was long and complicated, hindered by rumor and the cruel anonymity of a crowd. But science and determination prevailed. Forensic technicians discovered a trace of DNA, barely visible, a single thread that would unravel the secrecy surrounding the crime. The search led to Timothy Madden, a local man known around town but never truly known at all. Madden, like Harlan in Lily's story, had once moved easily among the townspeople, blending in and drawing no special attention. When his DNA matched the sample found on Gabby, the truth became impossible to deny. Madden was arrested, tried, and ultimately sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole, his guilt forever marked in the court's records and in the memories of everyone who had followed the case. But Gabby's story didn't end in the courtroom. The heartbreak and outrage it stirred inspired a wave of action and reform throughout Kentucky. Her parents, driven by both love and sorrow, pushed for changes that would help protect other children. Their fight became known as Operation Gabby Doolin, a statewide effort to strengthen investigations, enhance safety at public events, and give parents and law enforcement more tools to respond to danger. The initiative brought together families, police, lawmakers, and teachers, united by the conviction that no child should ever be lost again to such senseless violence. Stories like Lily's and Gabby's cannot be undone, but they carry forward in the work and determination of those left behind. The tragedy that began with one family's grief transformed into a call for vigilance, compassion, and justice. It became a warning, silent but enduring, that even the safest towns are not immune to darkness, and that hope, though sometimes battered, must never be allowed to fade. As years pass, the names and faces may blur, but the lessons remain. Behind every headline, every statistic, is a child whose story deserves to be remembered, a legacy of love and a community's promise to do better. In this way, Both Greenville and Scottsville keep their lost children alive in memory and in action, never letting go of the hope that tomorrow will be safer for those who follow. Today, the story of Lily Parker and of Gabby Doolin, the real little girl behind the fiction, echoes quietly through the halls of schools, over the fields where children play, and in the hearts of every parent who has ever known fear or loss. Their names have become more than just a headline or a fleeting tragedy. They have become a symbol of hope, of justice, and of a community's promise never to forget. For the Parkers, life split into a before and an after. Though time marched forward, every November brought with it the ache of memory and the rituals of grief. Laura would stand at the edge of the football field with a bouquet of pink lilies and a trembling hand, gazing into the tree line where innocence was lost. Ethan, once so steady and strong, became quieter, the weight of loss woven into his every gesture. Yet even as the pain lingered, something else grew, an unspoken bond with others who had suffered, a strength rooted in the choice to remember rather than to run from sorrow. In Greenville, the tragedy left a mark that would never fully fade. For years, children grew up hearing the story of Lily Parker, not as a ghost story, but as a gentle warning. Stay close to those who care for you, and trust your instincts. Teachers paused to glance out windows at recess. Neighbors checked in on each other more often. And the annual candlelight vigil for Lily became a gathering where grief mingled with hope, each flickering flame a silent vow to protect the next generation. Across Kentucky, Gabby's name became the rallying cry for new safety measures and public awareness campaigns. Operation Gabby Doolin was not just a law or a program, but a living memory. Families, law enforcement, and educators working together, fueled by the belief that change is possible, that no loss is truly in vain if it inspires action. Her parents transformed unimaginable pain into tireless advocacy, creating a legacy that reached far beyond the small town where her story began. But some wounds can only be healed by the truth. In the years since Lily's death, and Gabby's, the lessons have remained. Evil can hide anywhere, even in plain sight. No community is so small or so familiar that it can afford to be complacent. Protecting children, listening to them, believing them, and acting quickly when something feels wrong became the responsibility not just of parents, but of everyone. For every family who has known loss, and for every child whose voice was lost too soon, there is comfort in knowing their stories live on. Their names are spoken in classrooms, remembered in prayers, and woven into the fabric of their hometowns. Each time a parent hugs their child a little tighter, or a teacher watches the playground with more care, that legacy grows. So let Lily Parker and Gabby Doolin remind us: hold your loved ones close. Stay vigilant. Speak up even when it's uncomfortable, because silence allows darkness to grow. And above all, remember that hope is found in every act of kindness, every effort to keep another child safe, and every story bravely told. Subscribe to our channel to keep their memories alive, and to join us in seeking justice for the stories that still have no ending. Because while the world may move on, the fight for truth and safety never truly ends. In remembering Lily and Gabby, we honor all children, past, present, and future, and remind ourselves that even the smallest light can push back the darkness.